Last time out in Defending Made Easy, we were taking a look at counter-pressing and counter-attacking and how having those set correctly can help you defensively as a team. Today we're going to look at things like mistakes that your defensive line will make and how we adjust the line to eliminate those mistakes and become the best defensive team in the league. Let's go and kick some balls. Hello and welcome back to Understanding Football Manager with Old Man Phil, and if you are a brand new visitor, I'm Phil and welcome to the channel. And today we're continuing on. We're doing part 2 of how to become the best defensive team in your league. And last time out, you remember, we looked at counter-pressing and counter-attacking. And if you haven't seen that video, then I suggest possibly going and having a look at that at some time, because in that second screen on your tactic, there are some very useful tips in that video that will help you initially and immediately become a very good defensive team. And when FM24 did come out, defending was found to be extremely difficult, and I really struggled to make sense of how to become a good defensive team. But we have worked on it and we have found ways to do it. And in part 2, we're going to be looking at a different screen in your tactics screen and how we can help eliminate mistakes from your game. And we have become, in both of our saves, the best team in the league defensively. And in the live stream that we do with Notts County, despite having a really poor episode last time where we only won 2, drew 2 and lost 1, we can see that we are still the best defensive team in the league, and we have only conceded 15 goals. We are top of the league, but unfortunately that poor spell means that Reading have 2 games in hand on us and we are only a point in front, so I expect us to drop down to second. But for a team that is expected to finish in 15th in the league, we are doing exceptionally well, and to be the best defensive team in the league is absolutely phenomenal. And in our other save, our main save on YouTube, we are currently in Japan at Hiroshima. And you can see we have just begun a brand new season. We've played only 5 games in the league, but already you can see we're already the best defensive team in the league. We have only conceded 3 goals in our 5 games, and we just keep getting clean sheets. We've had 4 clean sheets in the last 5 games. It is a phenomenal defensive performance that we have put up both here at Hiroshima and at Notts County. And part of the reason that we are able to do this, you saw last time when we worked on our counter press and our counter attacking, and you can see, and there are reasons why these are switched off. But today we are going to be looking at the out of possession screen and why our line of engagement and our defensive lines are set in the way that they are, and also why our trigger press is set also in the way that that is set. And it is this that also helps to enable us to eliminate defensive errors which are responsible for most of the goals that are scored against you by the opposition in football. So we are conceding fewer goals and therefore becoming a much better defensive team. And then coupling that with the way we play in counter press and the way we play as a counter-attacking unit, we have become unbeatable at the back. So the first thing that we're going to look at is why our trigger press is set to slightly more often. It's a bit of an illusion, that, because at the moment our mentality is positive and the trigger press is aligned with the mentality that you're using. So if I go to balanced in terms of mentality, what happens to the trigger press is it now becomes a standard trigger press. But if I move it up to positive and now go to the trigger press, it's slightly more often. What I'm doing is just basically having it set to the middle on the slider here. We are not good at pressing, and so we know that because we already have, for this team, we have counter press switched off. We're not good enough to run around for 90 minutes and try and put pressure on the opposition all the time. And so similarly with the trigger press, we know we're not good enough to do that constantly. And so we're not going to, in other words, trigger press too often or too hard. The prevent short goalkeeper distribution will remain switched off. When we know who we are playing and what their goalkeeper is going to do with the ball, then we'll either switch that on or we'll switch it off. If he plays the ball long, then we're going to keep that switched off. And if he plays the ball short, then probably we are going to try to prevent him, especially if his passing is weak and his composure is not very good. Then we'll try and prevent him from playing out to his central defenders or his fullbacks. But in the main, until we know, we're just going to leave that switched off. And having the trigger press set to a balanced style, it does mean that we can now individually set our players to whether or not we want them to counter-press more or to counter-press less, depending upon their own individual ability. Our fullbacks, we want them to close down less. I do not want the fullbacks pressing too hard. I am concerned that we are not that pacey. Pace is not something that we have in abundance, and neither is balance and agility. So I don't want the fullbacks pressing fast wingers or fullbacks too much. And so they are set to close down less. The only two that I have set to close down more are my two central midfielders. Tactically, what we want to do is to compress the midfield and to allow the opposition midfielders absolutely no space to spread through balls or balls over the top. And so we deliberately set out to buy players who can fulfill the role of pressing hard and also being able to mark and to tackle. And so those are the fundamental things that we want from any midfielders coming into the club. If they haven't got that, they're no good to us. And so it doesn't matter how technically gifted they are. If they can't mark, tackle and close down, then they're pretty much no good to us. So we deliberately set out to find players like Notsuda. Notsuda has all the attributes I need to enable him to close down more. He's got good anticipation. He makes good decisions. He has good teamwork. His work rate is excellent. He's got strength and stamina. And so has Ito. And so these two are told to close down more. The others are just set to a standard press. And that ties in then with the team trigger press being standard. And so it's better to ask players individually if they have the right attributes to do it, to close down. And when you're building a team to fit your tactic, it's about finding the right players to fulfill what you need them to do. And we won't be happy when we bring in midfielders. We need them to do those jobs. And so if they haven't got that, it doesn't matter how good they are in other areas of the game, they're no good to this team, because we have to tactically be able to close down the midfield of the opposition. And so that's how we've set up in terms of the trigger press. If you are a very good team, then you would probably have that set to a higher level. And often, if we are losing, if things are not going very well early in a game, then one of the first things that I'm going to do is perhaps look to see if we are giving them far too much space. And if it looks like we are, then I will up the trigger press in order to try to limit the amount of time and space that the opposition are having. But at the beginning of the game, I'm going to have it set to slightly more often. And more often than not, I don't need to change that in game. Sometimes, though, you will need to make adjustments when things are not going well. And so the next thing to look at is the line of engagement, and why I have that set for this team at a high line of engagement and not a low block or a mid block. And if we go to our squad planner and the comparison yet again, if we eliminate the goalkeepers and the defenders from the mentals, physicals and the technicals, and we will have a clean slate just for the midfielders and the strikers. If we look at the technicals, we can see what we are interested in is how capable our midfielders and strikers are to win the ball back. And we need to be very good. If we're going to play high up the pitch, we need to be quite good at winning the ball back. If we're not good, our strikers and midfielders are not great at winning the ball back, then we need to maybe not be so attacking and not be so aggressive in terms of being high up the pitch and attempting to win the ball back. And we need to look at some of these attributes and make a decision about that. Our technical ability in terms of midfielders and strikers is okay. Tackling is not great. But when we come back to the mentals, we can see that we anticipate situations very well. We're very brave. We are very determined up top. Our positioning is not great, but our teamwork and work rate is very good for our midfielders and strikers. And in terms of the physicals, we don't have much acceleration, but we do have a good amount of natural fitness. We have good stamina. And we have reasonable pace. And so I think this team is good enough to be winning the ball high up the pitch. And so that is why we have a high line of engagement. We particularly have midfielders who are capable of winning the ball back. So the higher up the pitch we win the ball back, the more effective we are going to be as an attacking force. I want my attacks to start from here rather than from way down here. And so we can get the ball forward with the least amount of effort from this position. And I know we can win the ball back in this area. If we were not good at winning the ball back in this particular area, then I'd have to drop the lines a little bit and allow them to play out of defence before I engage with them. But we are capable up front and in midfield of winning the ball high up the pitch, and so that's why I have a high line of engagement set. Even though we are not going to be counter-pressing, we can still win the ball high up the pitch. And so finally we will come to the last bit of this tutorial, and we're going to look at the positioning of the defensive line. And as you can see here, we have our defensive line set at standard. Although that could change before a game or during a game, pretty much I've decided that that is what we are going to play mostly. We are going to step up more because we are light in midfield, and although they are very good at their jobs in midfield, stepping up more will compress the space in midfield and help my midfielders to win the ball back in midfield and to put pressure on the opposition and stop them creating chances. So step up more is something that I will use when I'm using a standard line. The position of the line is dependent on how good a defence you have, and basically if you're the higher up the pitch, the more risk you are taking. It is going to be beneficial for you as an attacking force to have your line much higher up the pitch. You're going to engage with their attackers higher up the pitch, win the ball back and create all sorts of problems. But by having your line high up the pitch, you are leaving a lot of space and you are leaving your defenders vulnerable in other ways. And mistakes will be made because they do not have the time that they would have if they were positioned slightly lower back on the pitch. And mistakes will be made by defenders because of a lack of composure, because their concentration was poor, because of a bad pass or a bad piece of dribbling, because they lose concentration, or because they weren't able to press an opponent, or perhaps they were too tight on an opponent and he was able to shift the ball on behind them. Perhaps they didn't have the pace or the balance to deal with quicker opponents. There's a number of attributes we need to look at in order to determine whether our defence is good enough to be high up the pitch or whether we need to be lower down the pitch. And so if we once again go back to our comparison report, and this time we are going to remove everybody except for the defenders, and then we're going to have a look at how good they are in terms of those attributes as a defensive unit. And in terms of the physicals of our defense, you can see that our acceleration is over 13. That's pretty good for this level and would be okay actually if we were a championship team. So for this team, that's a very, very good level of acceleration. We also have plenty of pace and we have a lot of stamina in terms of the physicals. We have to balance this up against the fact that our agility and balance is not as good, and so we could well be vulnerable to teams who are faster, who have more acceleration and have more pace and are good dribblers. We might not be able to turn if we are up against faster opponents or opponents who are as fast as us. Moving on to the mentals, you can see that we are quite aggressive, so we will be winning the ball back. We're very brave. Our composure and our concentration is pretty poor, and a lot of mistakes will be made because composure and concentration is poor. Decisions are not great, and our positioning is barely above 11, which is really not very good. Teamwork is not very good, and our work rate is pretty poor as well at the back, and so not very good in terms of our mentals and in terms of the technicals for our defense. Our passing is not brilliant at the back, and technically we're not a great team. 12.4 for tackling could mean that we miss tackles, and so really we are not the best team in terms of our ability to defend. For this league, it doesn't look like we are too bad, but when we are setting up a tactic, remember we have to decide how good we are, and I would say we are okay at defending. We're not good, we're not poor, but we are okay, and therefore I'm going to set my line at an okay standard defensive line, and that is where I will start my defensive line. If I can see that they're getting much more space, I've already thought we can up the trigger press, but I can also move the line up, and then I can also, in an extreme situation, I can counter press them in an effort to try and put more pressure on the opposition. But I would do that if things are not going particularly well and I would combine that with the trigger press first in order to try and put more pressure and play the game higher up. It's taking a greater risk because my defense is going to be leaving space behind them, and we don't really have the pace or the agility and balance to turn quickly if they decide to put balls over the top. But sometimes this is about balance of risk, and whilst I'm going to start games with the risk being minimal, sometimes I'm going to have to just push up and take greater risks. I'm going to have to possibly risk getting out of shape and conceding goals in order to score goals. But most of the time, working with this system, it seems to work quite well. It's just figuring out in-game when you need to change the system. And so that's it for part 2, and that's it for this video. I hope that you have got something out of this and that there are a few tips that you can take away about how to correct poor defending and how to avoid making mistakes at the back and to become the best team in defence that you can possibly be. Sometimes they have the ability, but they just need a little bit of help from the manager in order to make the most of the abilities that they have. In part 3, we are going to take a random team and we are going to set them up. We're going to set the tactic up as I would normally set up a tactic, but we're going to do it differently because I set up tactics differently to most. We're going to actually reverse engineer it. So that will be an interesting little video, and hopefully we will then play through a season and we'll go on to be the best defensive team in the league. That is the hope. That's what we would like to achieve, and we're going to give that a try. But even if we are not the best defensive team in the league, you'll get to see how I set a tactic up from scratch and how it's not rocket science and it's not anything to be afraid of. So if you are brand new or you've been playing for just a few years and you're really struggling with setting up tactics, this will definitely be for you. It's very simple to do, and we're going to make it very simple for everyone to be able to set up a tactic. And so just before we go, if you are brand new to the channel and you like FM content and you love to see people suffer playing the game, why not subscribe and like and help the channel to grow? And don't forget, if you do subscribe, to hit that bell so that you'll be notified every time that we upload a brand new video. And all that remains to be said now is thanks for watching. I hope you got something out of it, and stay safe. Take care. We'll see you in the next video.